In a distant land, where a man's word decides a woman's fate, Dilara was given away in marriage for fertile lands, unaware that on their wedding night, Prince Khalil would do something unimaginable. Can a promise of freedom turn into true love when duty and desire clash? Choices can change everything. Hidden secrets, palace intrigues, and hearts beating in silence await their unveiling in this story filled with passion and courage. Before we begin, tell me, from what part of the world are you listening? Do you believe that true love can be born in the most impossible circumstances? Make yourself comfortable and join me in uncovering this story. Karaman, 1854. The wind, descending from the Anatolian mountains, sweeps across the dry land like an ancient sigh, carrying with it the dust of centuries and the broken promises of desperate people. At the top of the valley stands the governor's palace, like a precious gem carved from white marble, cold and silent, where the fate of a young woman is about to be decided without her voice being heard. Dilara rode in a closed carriage, accompanied by two armed, silent riders. The sound of creaking wheels on the stony road was the only sound accompanying her silence. There were no tears in her eyes, not because she didn't want to cry, but because something inside her hardened the moment she heard her father utter those words in a transactional tone. Prince Khalil Dayer will provide land in exchange for your hand, as if she were no more than an extension of a ruined estate, another field handed over to the empire's power. Her mother remained silent, only gently touching Dilara's face and blessing her. Her trembling touches were like a farewell kiss. Dilara bore her no ill will. She knew her mother had no power over anything, not even her own destiny. The palace appeared in sight with the grandeur that only places built for intimidation can possess. Copper domes, polished stone columns, silent almond gardens, and fountains that no longer sang. No ceremony awaited her. Two women in gray indicated where to leave her belongings. One of them, brusquely, removed her veil, as if emphasizing from the start that even modesty no longer belonged to her here. "So, this is the wife," a voice whispered from behind. Dilara slowly turned her head. Before her stood a woman of almost unsettling beauty, looking at her with a half-smile that didn't reach her eyes. This was Julia, the prince's beloved, whom everyone expected to see as his wife, now burning with jealousy in hollow silk, a tightly fitting tunic. "The prince usually doesn't choose so quickly," she added, and left without waiting for an answer. Dilara remained silent. She had already learned that silence holds more dignity than humiliation. As she was led to her chambers, thoughts of the man who was to become her husband by night did not leave her. She had never seen him. She knew he was about 30, that he had served the Sultan in military campaigns and now governed Karaman with a firm hand. But she didn't know if he was cruel or just another man who takes without looking into the eyes of what is offered to him. Prince Khalil Dayer stood on the balcony, watching the arrival of the young bride. Her figure, emerging from the carriage, seemed almost ethereal, slender and upright, without the slightest trace of doubt. He recognized her immediately by the way she held her head, looking into the courtyard, the proud stance of someone who had lost everything but dignity. He had not asked for her, did not want this, but the Council of Elders had compelled him to forge an alliance with influential families in the region. Dilara's father, weakened by drought and debts, offered his daughter in exchange for the liberation of imperial lands and a promise of loyalty. Khalil agreed not out of interest, but to prevent a rural rebellion that could engulf the province in fire. He did it out of duty, as he had done much else since being appointed here. He was not a man of public passions. He had loved before and vowed not to make such mistakes again. Therefore, when it was announced that the girl had arrived at the palace, he ordered no preparations, no music, no wedding feast. Instead, he calmly went to his chambers, preparing for a difficult night, determined to hold his head high. Dilara sat before the mirror. Her hair was still braided, as at home. She wore a simple silk dress, deep blue without embellishments. Her bare feet touched the thick carpet. She did not rise when he entered, but slowly turned her face towards him with an expression of anxiety and defiance. Khalil stopped a step away from her. He was not a man prone to doubt, but that night words came to him more slowly. I have not come to fulfill a duty that neither you nor I chose. I know this union was not your choice, and it was not mine either. Therefore, this will be your room, your sanctuary. No one will enter here without your permission, not even I. She didn't answer immediately, studying his eyes for a long time, searching for a lie, but found nothing but weariness and something else, something painful to behold. "What is expected of me?" she finally asked, carefully controlling her voice. "That you remain here, fulfilling your role. But I don't want a submissive wife, nor do I want a woman who fears me. If one day you decide to share more than just these walls with me, that will be your choice." Silence stretched between them, like a taut silk thread. Then he nodded slightly and left without looking back. That night, Dilara did not sleep out of fear or anger. She slept because, for the first time, confusion outweighed the pain. Dawn arrived unannounced. Above the walls of the Karaman Palace, the sky was still pale gray. As the first sounds of the harem slowly began to awaken the corridors, the quiet murmur of water in the fountains, the soft rustle of servants' steps, the distant call to prayer, in the north wing, where the newly arrived bride slept, silence clung to the walls like a heavy veil. Dilara opened her eyes, having slept only in snatches. It wasn't the softness of the bed or the scent of embroidered pillows that kept her awake. She was roused by uncertainty, the unsettling calm left by Prince Khalil Dare's carefully chosen words the previous night. She had expected coldness, coercion, even humiliation, but she had met only distance, a distance she couldn't define, whether it was respect or punishment. The room was spacious and exquisite. Silk and resin hung neatly on a wooden screen, and on a low table stood a tray with fresh fruits, dates, and a bowl of honey. Everything was arranged with care, almost ceremonially, yet nothing felt her own. This wealth was a gilded cage, and she had no intention of adorning it with submission. A woman with sharp features, dressed in a dark tunic, entered without knocking. She walked purposefully, yet silently. Her hands were large, her fingers coarse, but clean, her nails neatly trimmed. Her gaze was not cruel, but impenetrable. "I am Bakunran Kala," she said, without bowing her head or smiling. "I have been assigned to serve you, but that does not mean I am here to please you." Dilara did not reply. She simply stood with dignity, smoothing the sleeves of her cotton robe, her gaze fixed on the window where a timid ray of sun was beginning to break through the curtains. Nuran remained motionless, quietly assessing her. "Some believe that a wife without a shared bed is merely a guest," she said, in a neutral tone. "I am not here to judge, but you should know that everything you do or don't do will be observed and discussed." "You?" asked Dilara, without turning around. "Everyone here speaks without words." Thus began a heavy routine. Every morning, Nuran led her to the bathhouse, offering new outfits: silk and brocade, embroidered veils, elegant leather sandals. Each time, Dilara chose simple clothes in neutral colors, the restraint of one who does not wish to be noticed. She ate in her room in silence, barely tasting the food. She never attended the harem's gatherings, did not respond to the greetings of other women, and never asked about the prince. Soon, whispers began in the corridors. Her name was uttered with a hint of mockery and fear. Some called her the wife without a crown, others the new shadow. But Julia spoke the loudest. From her privileged position in the harem, she unleashed venomous words with painful sweetness. She claimed that the prince had accepted this marriage only out of a sense of duty, that Dilara was merely a peasant in disguise, another coin in provincial negotiations, that her silence was not dignity but ignorance, and that soon she would be sent back to where she belonged. The servants, eager not to lose Haria's favor, repeated her words with nervous chuckles. Some avoided Dilara's gaze as they passed, others ignored her altogether. But Nuran noticed everything, and, though silent, began to feel something she couldn't yet name: resistance. Because Dilara did not cry, did not beg, did not ask. She held her head high, spoke softly, and walked firmly. Every refusal was a shield, every silence a statement. From the far end of the palace, Khalil observed her discreetly, with a quiet attention that few noticed. Sometimes he watched her from the window overlooking the gardens as she walked alone among the orange trees, hands clasped behind her back, or sat by the reflecting pool, not touching the water, simply gazing into the mirrored sky as if searching for answers. He never called her, sent no messengers or gifts, but neither did he avoid her. His presence was like a shadow beside her, close but never reaching. One night, as Dilara prepared for bed, Nurin placed a small carved wooden box on the table. Inside was a silver brooch, adorned with mother of pearl, simple yet beautiful. There was no note or name. "Who sent this?" Dilara asked, not touching the ornament. "I don't know," Nurin replied, without looking up. "But no one gives such a gift without a reason." Dilara carefully closed the box and set it aside, letting it remain there. "I don't accept gifts from men who don't speak," she said. For the first time, Nurin's stern expression softened slightly, a barely perceptible crack in her usual rigidity.
Not all silences are cowardice.
Dilara did not reply, lying down without a word. But that night, sleep did not come easily, because for the first time, she wondered if that distant man, the prince with dark eyes, was truly as indifferent as he seemed. In the following days, the atmosphere in the harem grew heavier. Hurriya could not bear that, despite her isolation, Dilara had not broken. The gossip became increasingly malicious. They said the prince avoided sharing a bed with Dilara because he found her unattractive, that she would soon be sent away, and someone else would take her place. One afternoon, Dilara discovered withered petals scattered on her bed. No one saw who put them there, no one came to remove them, but the message was clear, a reminder that in this place, flowers that do not bloom are uprooted. She did not cry. She picked up the petals one by one and dropped them into a pitcher of water. She watched them float. Then, without looking at Nairan, she whispered, "Better to wither standing than to bloom on your knees." That night, when Nurin closed the door, she did so more gently than usual. In the wing of silence, where no one laughed, where echoes sounded louder than voices, a young woman began to rebuild herself, without help, without promises, without tenderness, only with the weight of her own pride and the growing mystery of a man who, without touching her, began to occupy her thoughts. That day, the caravan wind blew fiercely, raising a whirlwind of dust and dry leaves in the palace courtyards. Autumn began to paint the trees in shades of ochre and crimson, and silence permeated the corridors like an uninvited guest. In the harem wing, the days stretched heavy and suffocating, and Dilara's name continued to echo, never spoken aloud, but heard by all. After several days spent in her own shadows, Dilara began cautiously exploring other parts of the palace. Her steps were circumspect, not intended to attract attention, but her eyes absorbed every detail with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. During one of these quiet strolls, she discovered a carved wooden door, slightly ajar, from beneath which wafted a faint scent of old papyrus, dried ink, and secrets. It was the library. The room was spacious, with high arches. Bookshelves soared to the ceiling, like columns of a forgotten temple. Soft light streamed through tall grated windows, casting intricate patterns on the carpets. No servants, no whispers, only the quiet company of books and a pair of low-backed armchairs, on one of which a blanket was neatly folded. Nurin found her there at sunset, with a book in her hands. Her eyes were fixed on a page she wasn't reading. "I didn't know you could read Arabic," Nurin remarked from the doorway. Her voice was rough but calm. "My mother taught me until my father forbade it," Dilara replied, without looking up. "Nothing is forbidden here until it is spoken aloud." From that moment, the library became her refuge, a place without judgment or reproach, where she found a peace she hadn't known for many years. She read Sufi poetry, ancient chronicles of the empire, treatises on inheritance and nobility, but it was on one of the shelves that she discovered a small chest, covered with linen cloth. Inside were letters, some unsigned, others sealed with official stamps, all written in elegant black ink, framed with delicate golden patterns. With trembling hands, she began to read. One letter from a high-ranking imperial official warned of dangerous and sentimental behavior during the Kayseri campaign and recommended his dismissal or secret exile to a secondary province. Another letter, much more personal, seemed to have been written by Khalil himself. It had no addressee. It was a confession, an outpouring of helplessness before an unjust order to burn an entire village in response to an attack that occurred elsewhere. Khalil refused, disobeyed the order, refused to stain his sword with innocent blood. The court silently condemned him. He was not stripped of his title, but sent far away to govern Karaman, a punishment disguised as duty. Dilara placed the letter on the table as if it burned her hands. Her breathing quickened. She didn't know what shook her more, the cruelty of the order or the choice of the man everyone described as cold and impenetrable, a man who had saved many and carried the burden of compassion as a secret curse. That night, as she dined alone in her room, something inside her loosened, like a knot that could no longer hold. Her gaze drifted to the silver brooch, still lying untouched on the table. For the first time, she reached for it. At the other end of the palace, Khalil stood before a map of the province. His advisor spoke of trade routes, crop failures, and new taxes. He nodded, listened, but his thoughts lingered on the image of Dilara, sitting by the reflecting pool, hands clasped behind her back. He wanted to approach her and tell her he understood, but his own past reminded him what happens to men who open their hearts in a world built of steel and power. That same night, as the palace lamps began to extinguish one by one, Julia roamed the corridors. Her velvet veil concealed a cold fury. From the shadows, she watched Dilara, saw her do the unthinkable. She refused to play the game, tried to please no one, did not seek the prince's favor, built no alliances in the harem, and yet her silence was beginning to disrupt the order. With a twisted smile, Julia involved Aziza, a timid young maidservant, in her plan. "Just a few drops of bitter tincture," she said sweetly. "Nothing serious, just so she understands that silence has consequences." The tea was served at noon. Dilara drank it, not noticing the faint metallic taste. Minutes passed. First, a strange warmth flared in her chest, then dizziness, then the walls began to spin. She tried to stand. Her legs gave way, and she fell to her knees beside the couch, gasping for breath. Nurin was the first to find her. She saw Dilara on the floor, pale, with a weakened pulse, and without losing time, called for help. She went straight to the prince's chambers. Khalil, without moving, but with eyes burning like fire, quickly strode through the corridors with firm and relentless steps, ignoring the servants who made way. Breaking all protocols, he entered Dilara's room without a word and knelt beside her. "What happened?" he demanded, looking at Nurin. "Tea. I suspect something was mixed into it, but I cannot prove it. Not yet." Without hesitation, Khalil lifted Dilara into his arms. Her body was light, like a sigh. He carried her to his chambers and ordered cold compresses. He summoned the court physician and sat beside her for hours watching her labored breathing. He did not touch her forehead, did not speak, just watched, as if the answers to questions buried deep within his soul were written on her sleeping lips. When she finally opened her eyes, Dilara didn't know where she was. The curtains were different, the lamps higher, and the man beside her was the same one with the penetrating gaze and firm hands who had offered her freedom on the night the world expected possession. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, still weak. Khalil didn't answer immediately. He looked at her, steeling himself to speak a truth that could break something. Sometimes protecting someone means crossing boundaries. She wanted to reply, but sleep again took her into its embrace. And that night, for the first time since her arrival, the north wing of the palace remained lit until dawn, because when fate begins to unravel its threads, even the heaviest silence cannot prevent the truth from breaking through. That morning the rain stopped, filling the air with the smell of damp earth and wet leaves. The sky over Karaman gently opened between pale clouds, and the palace garden still quietly exuded the scent of orange blossoms. Autumn walked its relentless pace, and with it, Dilara's days grew heavier, as if each rising sun added a burden to her shoulders. A week had passed since she collapsed, a week of recovery, unanswered questions, and silence louder than any scream. No one spoke of what had happened, but the changes in the air were undeniable. Servants lowered their eyes as they passed her. Nurin became more attentive and watchful, and Khalil no longer entered her room, but she knew he had been there. The blankets were neatly arranged, the flowers in the vase fresh, and the silver brooch, which she had never accepted, once appeared beside her pillow, wrapped in white linen. Dilara asked nothing, simply waited until her legs could support her again, and when she finally walked into the palace corridors, her steps were calm, but her heart beat with restrained anxiety. She wasn't seeking conflict, but she needed answers. It was Nairan who, without words, showed her where to find him. The sun was already beginning to set when Dilara crossed the inner gardens, heading towards the marble fountain separating the harem wing from the governor's gallery. There, in the shadow of an orange tree still laden with late blossoms, stood Khalil Dare, his hands clasped behind his back. His gaze was fixed on the sky. He wore no cloak, just a long, dark linen tunic and a vest embroidered with faded gold thread. His silhouette stood out against the twilight, like a silent statue. Dilara stopped a few steps from him, neither bowing nor lowering her gaze.
Were you the one who ordered me brought here?
She asked. He slowly turned his head, not seeming surprised by the question.
No, but you agreed to the deal. You knew I was being offered as part of the negotiations, and you didn't refuse.
Khalil did not deny it.
The Council of Elders proposed it. I didn't want to publicly humiliate your father. I accepted it as a political duty.
Dilara parted her lips. Rage flared in her throat, but she held it back.
So, I was a convenient burden?
You were a price.
He replied with a brutal honesty that wounded.
A price I chose to pay to prevent a rebellion. I am not proud of it, but I do not deny it.
She looked away for only a moment, and the fountain beside them gently murmured, as if trying to fill the silence with gentler words. But she sought no comfort, only the truth.
Since you arrived, you haven't touched me, haven't forced anything upon me.
Is that because you despise me or pity me? Khalil looked at her, and for a moment something softened in his dark eyes. It is out of respect, and because I want no one beside me who looks at me with fear. Dilara studied him intently. He was not a man of many words, but each seemed weighed, measured deep within his soul, before leaving his lips. And what do you see when you look at me? She asked, now more quietly. He lowered his gaze, took a step forward, slow, deliberate, but not violating her personal space. I see a woman who does not bend, and that is worth more than any title. A shiver ran down Dilara's spine. It wasn't cold, but the way he said it, words that didn't try to convince her, but to acknowledge her. The wind grew cooler, the setting sun turned golden, and orange blossoms began to fall like quiet snow. Khalil took a long coat folded on his arm and offered it to her. Dilara accepted it without a word. Their fingers touched for only a second, but it was enough to send a shiver through her chest. Khalil walked away and sat on one of the stone benches. She hesitated, but followed him, sitting beside him, maintaining a respectful distance between them. For several minutes they were silent. Only the murmur of the water, the scent of the flowers, and the distant sound of the guard changing filled the air. I read your letters, Zalim, Dilara finally said. Khalil turned to her, tense. They weren't sealed, but they weren't meant for me either. He didn't answer. The silence that followed was heavy, but not hostile. I don't understand why you did it. Refuse to obey an imperial order, knowing it could cost you everything. Khalil narrowed his eyes as if the memories still pained him. I saw children in that village, saw trembling old people who didn't even understand why they were destined to die. I couldn't do it. I am no martyr, no hero. I am just a man who could not bear injustice. Dilara lowered her gaze. Something about this man shattered all her assumptions. He was not whom she expected to find, neither a tyrant nor an absent husband. He was a man hiding his wounds beneath layers of control. "I am not used to men who respect silence," she confessed, "and I am not used to women who survive without lowering their eyes." Their gazes met in the silence of this unspoken acknowledgement, for only a second. But in that moment, something broke and something was born. It was not desire, not tenderness, but recognition. As if for the first time, they truly saw each other, freed from duty and expectations. Night slowly fell. The garden lanterns lit up one by one, casting long, warm shadows. Dilara wrapped the coat tighter around herself. The scent of the fabric evoked something elusive in her. It wasn't perfume, but a presence. "Khalil, will you pretend again?" she asked quietly. "I won't pretend that this is what I dreamed of. I know. I just need to know if I can ever trust." "Only you can answer that." At that moment, she understood for the first time. She wasn't being pursued, she wasn't being tracked, she was being awaited. And in that waiting, perhaps, something unnamed began, quietly learning to breathe under the stars. On the night the first November rains fell in the garden, they were soft, like premonitions. The sky, heavy with thick clouds, enveloped the palace in a damp veil, making the garden's scent richer and the silence in the corridors deeper. In the harem, days passed heavily, stiflingly filled with embroidery, quiet music, and whispers hidden behind silk fans. But in Dilara's soul, something began to awaken. Slowly, like stagnant water stirring before breaking its stillness, she began to breathe differently, walk more firmly, look other women in the eye without fearing their judgment. Niran noticed that she no longer followed Dilara as closely as before, but observed her gestures, decisions, and silence, like a mother who neither protects nor abandons. One morning, as Dilara wandered alone in the gardens of the West Wing, a servant approached her with quick steps. "Guests have arrived. The prince asked not to be disturbed, but there is someone who insists." Dilara needed no explanation. Her heart tightened with a bitter intuition. She ascended the marble steps, her heart pounding, passed through the vestibule without permission, and upon reaching the small audience hall, she saw him, her father. He was modestly but elegantly dressed, as if trying to retain his lost dignity. His beard had grayed, his eyes had deepened, but his voice retained its authoritative tone, the one he used not for discussions, but for commands. "Daughter," he said, extending his hand with complex courtesy. "Finally, I see you." She did not move. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I came to speak with the governor. I have a proposal that will surely interest him." Dilara frowned. The air around her grew heavy. "What proposal?" "That is men's business," he replied sharply, turning away with irritation. "You shouldn't interfere." But it was too late. Khalil quietly entered the room, accompanied by two advisors. Seeing Dilara before her father, he stopped, observing the scene with the unwavering calm of a man who had learned to read gestures before words. "I can listen, but if this is a family matter, I prefer my wife to stay." Dilara's father tensed, cleared his throat, clutched the hat he held under his arm, and with an empty smile said, "Your Excellency, as you know, I have another daughter, younger, more obedient, less problematic. I thought she might be useful in your house as a servant, and in return, if you deem it fair, you could grant me lands in Elam's Dire that are not yet developed." A thick and suffocating silence ensued. Dilara felt the world collapse on her chest. Her sister, her younger sister, was being offered like another sheep from the flock, like herself, like many others. She stepped forward, clenched her fists, her voice trembling with rage. "Was it not enough to sell me like a barren piece of land? Now you offer another, as if daughters are seeds traded for favors." Her father proudly lifted his chin. "You have a place in this palace. You have privileges. You lack nothing." "Nothing," she repeated, her voice bitter. "Nothing but the respect of the one who should have protected me." Khalil stepped forward. His gaze was a shadow, dark and heavy, falling upon the visitor's face. Enough, Mr. Yilmaz, he said in an even and restrained tone. In this palace, we do not conduct business with those who do not know the value of dignity. Neither land, nor services, nor women will ever be sold here in my presence. Dilara's father turned pale. I was only trying, he began, but Khalil interrupted. And do not return. The man opened his mouth, but no answer followed. At that moment, he understood he had nothing left to lose. He left the room without saying goodbye, his quick steps betraying that he had lost far more than just an opportunity. Dilara remained standing, frozen in silence. Khalil looked at her, not with pity, not with comfort, but with respect, a quiet acknowledgement, light as a touch, heavy as a promise. That day, the palace corridors seemed wider and emptier. Dilara walked through them like a person who had crossed an invisible threshold. But the peace was short-lived. In the east wing, Julia waited, sprawled on velvet cushions. She wore a tight red entari. Her hair cascaded freely over her shoulders, and a string of artificial pearls gleamed around her neck, catching the twilight. She had heard the whispers, knew Dilara's father had been banished, and understood that her chance was slipping away. She was not ready to accept this. That night, as the prince headed to his study, Julia crossed his path. She pretended to accidentally drop her handkerchief. Bending to pick it up, she slowly rose and approached closer than she should have. My prince, there are nights that should not be spent alone, she purred sweetly. Khalil did not reply. He tried to walk past, but she stood in his way and without warning, kissed him. It was not a sweet, tender kiss, but an invasion, a desperate act. Neither of them noticed the figure at the end of the corridor. Dilara, with a shawl draped over her shoulders, walking slowly to think. She saw them, Julia's gesture, and the prince standing motionless. She said not a word, simply turned, quietly closed the door, and sat by the window, sighing deeply.